Welcome, folks, to another episode of the Profitable Sheep and Goat Production Podcast. So, Matt and I are here again today, and along with us, we have Dan Persons from Minnesota. Matt and I have known Dan for several years, and I think my first introduction to Dan was when I met him at a sheep event, and he was behind the Shearwell booth. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Shearwell EID system and the FarmWorks computer software, today we will have an introduction to that. So Dan is the Shearwell rep here in US, and he's also a Polypay breeder. So we would like to hear from Dan not only about the Shearwell and the FarmWorks program and what they can do for an operation, but we're also want to hear his thoughts and comments on his sheep and his production system and where he started and where the sheep have taken him today. So, welcome, Dan. Glad to have you here.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
So, can you tell us a little bit about what got you into sheep? What got you in the field you're in today?
Yeah, so I've had a kind of a different story getting into it. It's not a family farm. I kind of grew up around this farm, but it wasn't a family farm. It was friends of the family. Um, Went off to college and got a degree in ag education and taught taught adult farm business management for 8 years in a technical college, working with individual farmers. So it wasn't like classroom teaching, it was one-on-one teaching. Did that for 8 years, and then I took a position as an assistant manager on the Blue Hill Ranch out in North Dakota. It was a commercial cow-calf operation with a farrow to finish hogs in the mix and a large grain operation on the side. So a real diverse operation. Owned some cows out there with the owner of Blue Hill Ranch and was there for 4 years. And then the farm I'm on now that I knew my whole life became available for sale. So we moved back to Minnesota and purchased this farm with my family and actually brought our beef cows home from North Dakota that I owned on shares with Blue Hill Ranch. We brought our share of the cows back to Minnesota and all was pretty good. You know, we kind of skated around in the cow calf business, and then at some point we needed more livestock for more income, but we didn't have any availability for more land. So we bought sheep and added them into our stock cow operation because we could add sheep in without increasing our needs for pasture because they eat different things. So it was a pasture management decision at the start. We started with 50 ewes. We actually bought the research flock from the University of Minnesota when the timing was right. They were dispersing their flock of sheep and we were looking for sheep. So we bought the university's flock for right or wrong. You know, it comes in with all kinds of mixed breeds and different stuff going on, but we bought it. The 50 ewes went really well. We lambed them out in an old chicken house, which I can't hardly believe. It was smaller than my living room, but we made it through it. Kind of decided at that point, if we're going to have 50, we might as well have more than 50.
Why not?
And the family liked it. So we went from 50 to 250. And then that went good. Still kept lambing out through a pretty small facility. Same decision started to be made. You know, 250 was fine. Adding a couple hundred more isn't going to make much difference. So then we went to 600. We went to like 400 first, and then we jumped to 600. We bought a semi-load of short-term ewes out of Wyoming and Montana and brought them in and started breeding them to half Finn, half Dorset rams, made our own homemade Polypays. And that continued to grow. And as that grew, the cows disappeared. We went to entirely a sheep operation. We peaked out at about 1,100 ewes. And at that time, we were doing 1,100 ewes and we accelerated lambing. We accelerated about a third of those during the year. So we were lambing January through May, and then again in September and October, pushing a lot of animals through a pretty small facility. But that's where we were with the sheep. And then, in the mix of all that, 50 head of ewes worked really good on recipe cards or a notebook. We could get by really easy. Made it work. Went to a bigger notebook when we jumped up sheep numbers, and went to Excel spreadsheets. So it was a progression over the years. It's almost embarrassing, but our first entrance into electronic records was pretty basic, but we used a paper tape calculator with a numbers key on it. And so when we weighed our lambs, we could key in the number of the lamb, hit the pound key, and then hit in the number of pounds the lamb weighed and hit the plus key. And at the end of the day, we had total weight and an average. Really rudimentary, but it was better than a sheeted notebook paper.
Yeah.
Put it in a nice print, and it was better. I had my first exposure to electronic tags. I can't even remember the year, but we visited a big Polypay ranch out in western Nebraska. And I still am a part of the Pipestone group, but I was pretty new into sheep, and we took a western tour. There's about 10 or 12 of us in the Pipestone group that headed west in vans. And we ended up on a big Polypay operation in western Nebraska, and they were using barcode tags. That was my first visual experience of somebody using an electronic kind of tag. And I made a kind of pledge to myself at that time that that's the route I'm going to go down. I saw that, and I saw their ability to work a lot of sheep in a short amount of time and be really accurate about it. But it took me probably about 6 or 7 years before I really got into that myself. So, but that's where our sheep came from. I mean, I had a teaching background, bought sheep to go with my beef cows, and then the sheep literally crowded the cows off the place. It was the cows couldn't compete anymore. Financially or space wise, they couldn't compete.
So let's talk a little more about the transitioning from cows to sheep. You're saying it was a financial decision. I'm guessing also with the number of ewes you were running, you were going more from a pasture-based system to more of a confinement with your ewes, or were you still mostly pasture-based?
So, yep, we've always maintained enough pasture over the years to graze all of our adult ewes. We don't lamb on pasture, and we don't graze any lambs.
Okay.
So, but we have always maintained enough. So as the cows exited, that freed up a lot of land for sheep. And we ended up renting some more land at that time too. We found another, about 100 acres of farmland that the owner of it was in CRP and didn't like the CRP, so we left it as grasslands, but we grazed it. So, across the road from me, it doesn't get much better than that, but it was farmland that was grazable, marginal farmland, but worked great for grazing.
Yeah.
But yeah, we did. When we were at 1,100 ewes, we still had pasture for almost all the ewes, minus the replacement females. They did stay on dry lot.
But your lambs would never go to pasture, so it would just be your ewes that didn't have lambs on them.
That's correct. Yep,
yeah.
Lambs still to this day rarely see the outside.
Yeah.
They're raised in confinement.
Yeah.
Open confinement, but confinement. Predators is a big issue and always will be. And the route we go, we have no predator loss on our young lambs at all. A little bit on ewes once in a while, but pretty rare.
No parasite loss on lambs either.
Nope, no parasites. Even Tuxidia a little bit, but we can feed to control that. So, but yeah, our ewes, I don't know that I've used a whole bottle of any parasite anthelmintic in the last 3 or 4 years. I don't think I've gone through one bottle.
Yeah.
So it just makes a big difference. We do rotationally graze. Most of our pastures are rotationally grazed, like 11 paddocks they go through. So it might be almost 2 months before they get back to where they started. It's a really long cycle, and you know, they're on them for 5-6 days, and then they're on to a new one.
And these paddocks, are they all perennial pasture?
They are all just a brome grass, alfalfa. Yeah, they're just they're all a perennial.
Are you still doing the accelerated lambing at all?
Not anymore. I haven't now for probably been 5 or 6 years since I did accelerated. We downsized our flock, and that made a little bit of a difference. But because right now, currently, we're less than 500, about 450 ewes. So, we really we did the accelerated for probably about 5 years, but we never had enough facilities to really do it right. We got really crunched for numbers of pens and space, especially in the wintertime here. We just have severe winters.
So the ones you're lambing now, are you lambing all at one time, or are you splitting that up some?
Yeah, that's a good question. So my lambing barn is pretty small. It really only holds ideally about 100 to 120 ewes. And so we do what we term here as wave lambing. So we will put about 100 to 150 ewes in with rams on day one. And then every 14 days, we'll add another 100 ewes to the breeding pens. And that smooths our lambing out. So it's pretty consistently somewhere in that 10 to 15 ewes a day to the end. But we will lamb from the first week of February, usually through the middle of April. And by mid-April, we're pretty well finished up. Ewe lambs are done and the ewes are done. But yeah, it's waved in, not everybody all in one big bunch.
And then you're moving the ewes with lambs out of that barn, I guess.
That's correct. Yeah, at about 3 to 4 days of age, they stay in the lambing barn for probably at most about 2 to 3 days in their lambing jugs. And then after that, they're out to colder housing. And so at 2 to 3 days, they get moved to a different facility on the farm.
And what does that look like?
One of those facilities is still a warm barn. It's a hoop barn that's had a hay mow put in it. So it's got a low ceiling and straw storage up above. And that barn we can keep, even on a really cold day, we can keep it somewhere around 30 degrees during the daytime. And it does have a heater underneath that floor too. So
for us guys from the East here, you might have to say, what's a really cold day for you?
So a really cold day for us. So a normal January day would be a low somewhere around 0 and a high somewhere around 20. Really cold is 20 to 30 below 0 with highs of 10 below 0.
Yeah. We should have introduced where are you?
Oh, yeah. So I'm in west central Minnesota. I'm about, if you draw a line across at the North and South Dakota line, I'm inside of Minnesota about 50 miles. Actually, about 40 miles inside of Minnesota. About 300 miles to the Canadian border, to the northern Canadian border. But we are on the edge of really prime farmland to the west of us, like really flat Red River Valley, deep soil, but flat as a pancake and all kinds of wind. But that's sort of where we're at, is west central Minnesota. And
Gotcha.
You watch the weather map, we're right where that point of really cold weather comes down almost every storm.
Mhm.
Holds right down that Minnesota, North and South Dakota border, and that's us.
That's
Yeah,
yeah,
that's us.
yeah. But you can still keep that barn to about 32 degrees, but that's with running a heater.
That is with a heater.
Yeah.
Yeah, that hoop barn with the haymow in it, and it's a pretty low ceiling, about a 8-foot ceiling under that haymow.
Mhm.
It's a 40 by 40 building, and we keep, if it's just ewes, we would put somewhere around 80 ewes in it at night. And then with the heater, but the heater wouldn't run continuously.
Yeah.
But with 80 sheep in there, it stays reasonable.
Mhm.
Um, it's when it gets to be 20 below zero and maybe there's only 45 or 50 ewes in it with their lambs that it just gets really cold and the heater will run all the time. It just can't keep up. But the heaters
Propane, or
don't last forever. You know,
what are you using for heat? Propane.
propane, just an LB White heater.
Yeah. Yeah.
There
Yeah.
was a time we had a stretch of really cold weather where it was, like 20 and 30 below zero at night, highs of 15 below zero. And we did that night move a big NIPCO heater in there and for extra supplement because it was just too cold. No way the heaters could keep up, and we had 2-day-old lambs in there, so
Yeah.
too
And
cold.
your lambing barn is an insulated, heated barn as well, right?
That's right. Yep, our lambing barn would be, if you stretched it all out in one long building, it would be 24 feet wide and 80 feet long is kind of the dimensions of it.
Mhm.
But it is fully insulated and lined with fans for ventilation and air intakes out of the attic. So, and a heater, one propane heater, but that doesn't run very much when it's full of sheep. When there's 120 ewes in it, it doesn't run very often.
Yeah.
It's really insulated well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one thing really stuck out to me when I was out there and did the pipestone tour a couple times here, is how you guys are using insulated lambing barns, which is
Yeah,
with that kind of cold, it just steps everything up another degree as far as
another
your
match. Yeah,
management. Yeah.
my ewes do have to go outside to eat. So when they're in the lambing barn, they have to go outside to eat. We feed one time a day. All of our sheep only get fed once a day. But they get fed a corn silage and haylage ration, and corn ration in an outside bunk. So they've got to run outside, grab a bite to eat, and then if they're cold, they can come back in. We have just like a warehouse plastic flap door that covers their entry. So they can freely go in and out all day long if they want.
Mhm. So
Interesting.
on nice days, they'll probably spend a good bit of time outside.
Yeah, this winter was really nice. Like the highs were around 30 every day during the winter. And about 2 weeks after they're sheared, they would rather lay outside.
Mhm.
So they'll lay out in the snow, or if a patch of dirt or on the cement. They're fine standing outside at 30 degrees.
Mhm.
So you probably get a good freeze. One in my area here, I'm up near the Lake Erie, and we get all that lake effect rain and snow and cold, and if we get enough snow, we don't actually even get a freeze, like a deep freeze, or don't get much frost in the ground even sometimes.
Oh yeah.
And so that's one thing I miss from back central PA where I used to live. We'd
Yeah,
get frozen ground at least.
we're frozen pretty solid most of the winter.
Yeah.
It's like our water lines are buried 7 feet deep to keep them out of the frost. So it's a different world.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, that cold. But it is amazing how much cold sheep can handle. You know, but with what you guys are talking, 20, 30 below, 40 below, that's just that
Doesn't work for baby lambs.
yeah,
The
yeah.
older ewes out in the feedlot, we've got windbreaks in the feedlot, and if they've got wool on, they're fine at 20 below zero.
Yeah.
Well, I say easy for me to say, right? But they're behind a windbreak, and they're huddled up and they're in a mass, but they're going to be okay if they've got wool on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As soon as we shear, which we do right before we're going to lamb, so we'll be shearing around Christmas and just after Christmas. And as soon as we shear, then we've got to provide buildings for them.
Yeah.
To get inside. But a couple weeks after they're sheared, you'll find them out just standing in the sun, even on a really cold, 0-degree morning. If there's no wind, they're going to be standing out in the sun.
Yeah. Yeah. One question I had, and the reason I had asked about your accelerated lambing is, so kind of the reason we got into accelerated lambing is we were doing it similar to what you are, lambing in the winter time, and then our ewes would go out on pasture all summer. And what we would find is our ewes get too fat, just being on pasture all summer without, being bred or anything. Do you find that, or doesn't seem to be an issue for you?
You know what, Matt? If you would neglect your pastures more, that food's not as good.
Hey, if you would pay for land what we do in here, even if it's pasture ground, you wouldn't neglect them either.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
My ewes will gain weight over the summer.
Yeah.
They'll gain some weight over the summer, but usually by July it's starting to, that brome grass is not very good nutrition anymore, and we actually have to bring them in at breeding time to get enough nutrition in to get a good flush on those ewes. So
that was going to be my next question. And in those conditions, how are you flushing them then? So it sounds like you bring them in and feed them.
yeah, we bring them back into the dry lots. Usually by the middle or the end of August, we're bringing them back into dry lot, and we flush them really hard on just corn silage and alfalfa hay. Usually no corn. We can get enough out of the silage, but we'll flush them hard in the dry lot and then start breeding first part of September.
Yeah.
Do you get a fall flush of grass regrowth then?
Yeah, usually September, early October, it'll green up again pretty nice. It's, for me, then it's always this question mark. Is it worth taking them out there? Because our first snows usually come the 1st of November. So is it worth taking them out of their good nutrition plane in the feedlot? And we're still breeding. Like some of them might just have gone in with rams. Do we want to mess with their nutrition during breeding just to pick up that little bit of grass we're going to pick up in October?
Right.
And sometimes I'll do it and sometimes I won't. It really depends on what the fall is looking like. And if I've got ewes, I think I've been with a ram for a month and I think they're all bred, then I'll maybe go out with them and do a cleanup on pasture. But this last year, we just left everybody in the dry lot. Pastures didn't green up and it was too dry. And by the time they did green up, the calendar just said, you've got about 2-3 weeks left and then they're going to be buried in snow anyways. So,
yeah. So when you're flush feeding, are you splitting your group up with what's going to get bred first and flushing those first, or are you doing the whole 9 yards?
Everybody all at once.
Everybody at once.
Yep. Everybody all at once. It's it becomes a labor issue with the large flocks. Is just fill that feed wagon once a day, feed them, and you're done. So
can you see any difference in your lambing rate from the ones that were bred first compared to the ones that were bred towards the tail end?
I'll say no, but that's probably because the first ones that lambed had a really good flush effect on them, but they're actually getting bred prior to the prime breeding season. So to compare that February 1st ewe to the March 1st ewe, March would be the prime breeding or the prime lambing cycle, but she missed out on that really good first flush. She just sort of got fat and made her way into the breeding herd. And the flush part of it was done. So I think we've evened out that lamb crop. I don't see I don't see a big drop or a big rise in lambing percentage from first ewe to the last ewe.
Yeah.
I
Interesting.
think if we didn't flush, we would end up with ewes that did not breed as fast as we wanted them to.
Yeah.
That's more of a danger for me than any. That's really my biggest danger with the number of sheep is they got to breed. Otherwise, all of a sudden, the ones that's supposed to be this week are into next week plus next week's group. And now the barn is just stuffed full of ewes and there's no room for them.
Yeah.
So you would say, I think most of us would think the longer they're on the flushing feed, the better we're going to flush them. But from what I'm taking from you, it's important to get that kind of when they start gaining weight. Like how long before you start breeding do you start flushing?
2 to 3 weeks prior to ram turnout, we start flushing.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and ewes that are in really good body condition, flushing doesn't do much for them, other than it might help synchronize them a little bit. But so would a teaser, and I don't use teaser rams anymore either.
Okay.
But I don't use teasers, but my rams are almost fence line to fence line. So there's ram effect without having the ram in.
Yeah.
But yeah, ewes that are in really good body condition, flushing doesn't have very much effect on them.
Yeah.
It's those thin ewes that really need those groceries. And I'd be curious to know if I sorted out my big fat ewes that came off grass, fat and healthy, if I could just leave those off the flush diet.
Mm-hmm.
But in the long run, we do all of our breeding in that dry lot because I single sire mate almost everything. And so how am I going to do that when that group of pasture fat ewes might have to go to 6 different rams?
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit of a logistics problem to make sure that they're in the right place at the right time. And
yeah, makes sense. I like to talk more about some of the logistics of how you just manage your flock and things. You were saying you're down to like 400, 450 ewes maybe.
Kind of an easy street.
To some of our listeners, they're going to be like, well, 400's a lot. I mean, we run like 350, 370 right now. And, in our neck of the woods, people would say we're a pretty big sheep operation. How do you, what skills maybe have you learned over the years, or how do you manage that? Do you have other people helping you? What's that look like?
Yeah, so part of how we manage it is we've taken as much labor as we could out of the sheep raising. So we have really good handling facilities. They're very basic, but they're really good. And it's a dedicated facility. So anytime we want to work sheep, that building, and it's inside, so we can work any weather we want, we can work. But that particular facility, it can hold about 600 ewes inside, all down, and then all go down a single alley chute. We've taken as much labor as we could out of it. So that's really key. All of our feeding is fence line feeding. So the only sheep we feed by hand are the ewes that are in the lambing jugs. Everybody else is on a fence line, so we don't even have to do so much as open and close a gate to feed our sheep. You just drive along and feed. The second thing is big groups. I mean, you have to kind of remember. So if you only have 50 sheep, you might have 4 groups or 5 groups of 10. Well, we've got 500 sheep, 5 groups of 100. And so things just become bigger and more, but it doesn't really make it more work. So I like to think of it, there's a lot of economies of size to doing this. So I would challenge everybody to look at for instance, just your feeding time. And my friends and I, we talk about feeding as how many seconds per head per day does it take you to feed your sheep?
Yep.
Not minutes or anything. How many seconds per head per day?
Yep.
Well, when we had 1,000 ewes and it was like maintenance period time, we could feed 1,000 ewes a maintenance diet in about 20 minutes. All done.
Yep.
And that's loading the TMR mixer.
That's loading the TMR mixer, driving it around the lot, and backing it back into a shed. All fit on one load.
Yeah.
You know, so you think, okay, so 20 minutes divided, and I don't know the math on it, but it's down there somewhere in that 8 seconds maybe per head per day. So let's say you had 50 ewes and you're going to do 50 ewes in 8 seconds per day.
Yep.
Never will happen.
Yep.
It took you longer to walk to the barn than what it took me to feed my sheep.
Yep.
And the idea of the pastures is interesting too, because so if I can feed 1,000 ewes in my dry lot in 20 minutes,
That's 2 seconds per head.
2 seconds per head. Yeah. And so now let's look at the pasture and say, if those 1,000 ewes are out on 3 different pastures, and I've got to drive and check water fountain, just checking water every day, not even including fixing fence. How long will it take you to go check water on 3 different pastures?
20 minutes per pasture.
Yeah. So now you're 3 times it already.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's just those kinds of things were what we had to look at when we did it.
Yeah.
From a labor standpoint, when we were at 1,100 ewes, it was myself full time, and at that, well, I was working for Shearwell at that time as well. But I would call my work on the farm was full time, 2,000 to 2,800 hours a year. It was a lot. So we did it was myself full time. I had a hired man that was about half time, year round, half time. He was either doing crops or sheep work half the time. And then my wife works full time in town, but she really took care of the bottle lambs. That was sort of her area, and it still is. And she made one check of the lambing barn at about 9 o'clock at night. That was her deal. And then weekends, you know, it's all everybody's working on the weekend, except my hired man. He worked 5 days a week and he had weekends off, every weekend off.
Yeah.
So on the weekends, my wife had to kind of take over and do some of the checking that I used to do.
Yeah.
But that was kind of our labor supply was.
So when you're talking 40, when you're talking full time, you're talking 40 hours a week, right?
Well, you know, it probably worked out to that because yeah, I see your mind spinning here, but so the sheep I would say was full time.
Yeah.
And then you can throw Shearwell in there
Yeah.
and that position as probably another quarter time. And then I worked for another grain farmer in the spring and the fall and put in somewhere around 400 hours a year on that operation. So yeah, it was full time. And yeah, a lot of hours we spend.
Yeah.
I will say that many years ago, we do not do any night checks. And those of you that know me know that I'm not an early riser either. So the first time the lambing barn door opens in the morning is about 8 o'clock in the morning. Whether it's me or whether it's the hired man, that's about as early as it ever gets opened. And we do not do night checks. We do one check right before we kind of go to bed for the night, and then that's it. No cameras, no night checks. So the next day you're rejuvenated.
Yeah.
You have not spent, you know, you got a good night's sleep. You're dead tired, but you got a good night's sleep, and you can go at it hard the next day again.
Yeah.
So, but that takes facilities.
Yeah.
That's part of the labor saving, you know, is no night checks, but our facilities are all warm and dry.
Yeah.
Occasionally you got a ewe that slipped through the cracks and she'll lamb in the feedlot or lamb in cold housing, but those all had a building too at that point. So they're not out they're not out in a blizzard. They're cold, but they're in a building with bedding. So.
Hey folks, just want to pause for a moment and remind you that this call is made possible by our host, Lost Creek Wholesale, who is your universal feeder distributor here in US and Canada. This time of the year, a lot of folks are looking for creep feeder options for lambs and kids. Here at Lost Creek Wholesale, we have 4 different feeder sizes, all the way from around 800 pounds up to over 3 ton. All 4 of these sizes have the capability of using our saliva lick portion of the feeder, where you can restrict an animal's intake. Sheep and goats, you can restrict them down to less than 1 pound per head per day. Or you can add creep gates to either one of these feeders and use them to creep feed those lambs and kids. Got questions about feeders, about creep feeders? Check out our website, www.lostcreekwholesale.com. You can go to our dealer page and find a dealer near you. If you got questions, you can give us a call at 717-310-3641. Now back to the fun stuff.
Yeah, that not doing a night check, I think's key. With as long as you're lambing, especially because we do night checks over our peak lambing, just mainly with our registered stuff. We have too many mix-ups. If we have 8 ewes lamb in one pen, they all have twins or triplets. There's just going to be mix-ups. But
so we do a little bit of mitigation on that.
Okay.
So at night, there's usually not more than about 15 ewes in a pen at night. And our key to that is before we lock them in their little pens, everybody gets chased outside before we lock them in their own pens. So we force them to go outside and mingle around and get all mixed up before we let them back in the barn. Because like every other sheep farm, there's favorite corners for lambing. And if we didn't do that, we would have all of our ewes lambing in one pen at night.
Yep.
Those 15 ewes would have all found the same corner. So we do some mitigation things that help reduce the mix-up. And we absolutely, I know, have ewes that raised lambs that weren't theirs. And
part of it.
Pick your battles.
What I was going to say, usually those 2 weeks or so that we do night checks, boy, that just drags on you. You're never getting more than 3 hours of sleep at a time. And I can only do that for that long. That drags on you.
You wait till you're a dad, Matt.
Yeah, then you can let the kids do night check.
Well, that's not what I had in mind.
You're saying I'd sleep so much more soundly.
You wait and see. Dan, how much time did you have? Are you
I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, it's not coffee time yet. So.
Oh, that's right. I'm looking at my time.
Yeah.
3 o'clock your time. Okay.
I told these guys before we started, they asked how much time I had. And I said, well, I've got an appointment at the neighbor for coffee at 3 o'clock. So it's a rainy day and he's a grain farmer. And so we're having coffee today at 3 in his shop. So
all right.
That's my sanity time. He's my farmer therapist.
Yeah.
So your Polypays, are they all in NSIP?
My Polypays are all on NSIP. I suspect I'm one of the largest flocks in the Polypay database. And I did it. They're commercial. They're almost every one of my ewes is a commercial ewe. And so I did it. I did it for myself, but I also did the NSIP so I could get a handle on how Shearwell FarmWorks software integrates with NSIP. So I could learn that myself. And I still feel that's the best way to do it, is immerse myself in it. So part of my professional improvement expenses is to be on NSIP. And but it has taught me about my sheep. It's showed me some of those sheep that are truly rock stars in the flock and have really good numbers. And I'm always been a numbers person with data, but NSIP just added another layer to it. So, but yes, they are all on. So
how long have you been in NSIP?
About 5 years. I think I've been in for 5 years, and I've got about 8 years of data submitted. So, because we took old data and brought in with us.
Sure.
Old
What,
data, old data from your calculator slip.
Well, converted into electronic eventually. Right. Right.
what would you say is the biggest benefit to being in an NSIP? Obviously, with your Shearwell, which we didn't get into a lot yet, but you already had a lot of data. You had a lot of reports you could pull up, that sort of thing. Uh, why did you need NSIP? Or what did you learn from using NSIP?
I So for me, what I believe NSIP does for me is it takes these. So I have the individual records, but it doesn't. An individual's record is fine, but it's just this dam and this sire is all you know. Whereas NSIP looks back and says, yeah, it's this dam and this sire, but it's this grandsire that's also related to this great granddam on the other side. And it starts bringing all that genetic data back together again. And so I would look at it as it evens out some of what I thought were rock star sheep are rock star sheep by anomaly. They're accidental rock stars. They showed up really good, but then when it goes back and it looks at all their contemporaries and their other daughters and their nieces that are in the flock, and it puts all those, kind of using human terms, together, but when it pulls all that together, it says, she's really good, but she's an accident because none of the other, yeah, she's an outlier. And so can you really rely on that outlier to produce you replacement females that are consistently good? Or are the replacements going to all falter back to her base genetics, which show is not that good? So I think that Matt is how I would look at it. Is that we and likewise we might have ewes that maybe she's only having one lamb a year, and by all means she should be gone, but her NSIP number keeps saying that genetically in her background she should stay and her daughter should stay because genetically she has a really good propensity in her gene background to have prolificacy and longevity and high weight gains. So I'd look at it as the evener of some of our contemporary data that may be really good, but we might be just looking at outliers.
Sure.
So they're not.
So you're saying, and just to kind of, I don't know, challenge you a little bit, because other people think this way. You're saying that that's not producing that well for you, her EBVs are telling you that you should keep her. So if you keep her, is her offspring going to do that well?
Yep. So maybe I shouldn't keep her, but maybe I should give her offspring a second look. Because if she's a loser and she's been a ewe that's gave me singles for 3 years, well, my cutoff is two in a row and they're gone.
Yeah.
But maybe if her NSIP number is really high, there's maybe a chance that she's an outlier on the other side of the board.
Yeah.
She didn't get that gene, but it doesn't mean she doesn't have it.
Yeah.
Just wasn't expressed in her. And I'm far from being a geneticist. I can kind of tell my own kids apart, but anything beyond that, I'm not a geneticist and I don't quite understand all that, but
sure.
But I do know that NSIP looks at more than just that 1 year at a time kind of data, and maybe shows that there's genetic links within the flock that make the daughter more valuable than what I think.
Yeah.
So how would genomics play into that? What would genomics tell us about that outlier animal?
That's a Ron Lewis question. I don't know. I was on a webinar here, and maybe you guys were too, that was talking about genomes, and no, you wouldn't have been on it. It was a Pipestone meeting, and we had a researcher out of Idaho that was presenting to us. And we talked about genome work, and it was kind of interesting because we talked about taking gene samples of everything. And my question to her was, if I have dam A and ram A, and I test one of that mating's offspring, and it comes back, and whatever the genome thing is, it comes back and says, oh, yep, it is the right mating, and this is her EBV. Well, if I mate that same ewe to the same ram next year, or even if I have twins, paternal twins out of that mating, or if I do that same mating next year,
No
I could
guarantee.
get totally different results out of same mating.
Yep.
And so genetics is not cut and dried. It's not clear. It's like if you go down that road, you almost have to test every lamb out of every mating every year, or you can't get enough data.
So the way I've heard that explained is that they could actually get like 60% of the DNA from the sire and 40 from the ewe. And the sibling might have 60% from the ewe's DNA and 40 from the sire.
It could be up to 60. Yeah. So
it's not a
what is it?
50-50.
Not even 50-50. Yeah.
Like we always think about it. It can actually get more DNA from one animal,
One or the other.
which I think is why
But is
we
that
see some sires that just really stamp their lambs. I'm assuming that they're getting more of the DNA from their sire than they are from the ewe.
I think they're getting the same amount of DNA from each, but the DNA that they're getting from that sire's DNA might also have the same genetic link in it as the dam. And so the two of them it happens to look like it all came from a sire.
Gotcha.
In reality, that ewe is carrying it in the background too.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'll make our disclaimer. None of us are geneticists.
There you go.
And we don't get paid much for this podcast.
that genomic thing is really interesting though.
Yep.
It's just the same as you might have a son that looks more like you than your wife.
Yep. And we can have 10 kids, and all 10 kids could look totally different, but same mom and dad. And it's the same thing. And so genetically, the same mom and dad, but they grab different genes from different people, and some good ones, some bad ones.
And if you look at how many different ways there are, I think I'm using the right terms, for the chromosomes to pair, how many different sequences how many different options there would be. It's just, I don't want to call it chance. It's
you're going to use an 80 SNP card or 100 SNP card, or how
or a 50K.
big card you get, 50Ks. Yeah. What are you doing? Yeah.
And then you talk about recessive genes and all that with some of your like horned or polled genes can be recessive where they can be carrying it but not showing it. With genomics, we can tease some of that stuff out.
I got an all white sheep herd. Every once in a while I get black lambs.
Yeah.
And I haven't had a black ram on the place for forever.
Yeah.
So it's all there in the background. It just depends on what's going to find its way to the surface. And
that's really interesting.
It's all really cool and nice, but I think when it gets right down to it for the average producer, I think these contemporary records we keep are key to survival in this industry. And I think we can make a lot of changes to our flock just with our own contemporary records. Barring NSIP, barring any of that, we can throw all that aside and we can still make our flocks way better than they used to.
Yeah.
My own personal story is I didn't join NSIP really to raise the bar on my sheep much. I wanted to add it as a tool, but when we started really detailing our records, and when we went to electronic records in 2012, we had 175% lamb crop. That was our drop in 2012. And I look at that today, and our drop in 2024 was 230%. And our drop this year was 220. And that was all purely by contemporary records and paying attention to what are we keeping and what are we throwing away? And are we maintaining a ewe that has the right body shape and size and capacity to carry lambs? Are we doing all the really right production things using our contemporary records? And we can make huge changes in our flocks just by that.
Yeah. So you dropped the ball a little bit there. What you meant to say with the Shearwell system that you sell, you can increase your lambing percentage by about, what was that, 50%?
Yeah, but see, here's the caveat. I would really love to be able to print that and publish it. But as you know, Matt and Leon, when you go to these systems, it's not a magic bullet.
Yeah.
You know, it has made my record keeping way easier and my ability to get reports easier. That's for sure. But if you aren't willing to spend the time and dig through your data and find and accept the challenges that your data present you, the Shearwell system or the Gallagher or the Allflex or any number of them will not do anything for your flock. They will just give you a more expensive ear tag.
Yeah.
But they won't change if you aren't willing to change how you're doing things and accept the data for what it is.
Yeah.
You won't change a thing.
So you're saying you actually have to use it. Just it shows up and the next day there's a big check in your bank. It doesn't work that way.
Absolutely doesn't happen that way. And sometimes it's painful because we make our biggest jumps in our flock by the culling process, and culling is expensive. It costs money to get rid of a sheep. But we just made our mind up that and I got this from a tour of they were at that time about 10,000 ewes in Canada, and we went and visited. And their message to us was, it's always the ewe's fault. Always, always, always. It's always the ewe's fault if something went wrong.
But what if you know it's not?
What's that?
But what if you know it's not?
No, it's always the ewe's fault.
Hey folks, I hate to tell you, but we were having such a good discussion with Dan that it got too long. We decided we're going to split this episode into 2 segments. So we will be back next week and wrap up our discussion. So stay tuned. Thanks again for listening. We hope you enjoy. And folks, if you like what we're able to bring to you, do us a favor. Share and subscribe. Give us a 5-star rating if you can. And if you can't, send me a message and let me know what we can do different. And we'll do our best to keep bringing you pertinent sheep and goat topics. See you next time.